All right, welcome to another live episode of GeekOutdoors.com. And as in every week, we're going to be talking about some really geeky news. And so this week, we got first and foremost the Google phone. And this is really related to the whole announcement earlier that HTC is going to be bought by Google, and now it's official. Secondly, we have iOS 11. If you didn't know, you could actually get the latest version of iOS 11, and it will be rolling out to many Apple devices here pretty soon. And finally, Linux Mint 18.3. So let's go ahead and get into it. And so if you didn't see earlier in the week, I actually did an episode where I talked about Google's potential purchase of HTC. Hey Clayton, good morning Clayton. How are you doing? Great, thanks for joining. And earlier in the week, I did talk about the news that Google might be buying HTC, and I wasn't entirely sure yet when I read the news, but now it's official. HTC is going to be bought, at least their smartphone division, by Google for a reported $1.1 billion. And the reason why I say Google phone is because this has a lot of history behind it. You know, this is kind of where Google was actually heading. And even when Android first came out, a lot of people was referring it to the Google phone because obviously Android was bought by Google. You know, if you remember, Android was originally created by Andy Rubin and his team at Danger, and they actually brought this out. Hey Sam, good morning. Hi Geek. Hey, thanks for joining, Sam. And this is why this whole thing is so important, and why I refer to it as the Google phone, because what I have here, and you've probably seen this in other videos, these are my Android phones, okay? And so let me show you. This is the very first Android phone that I have, okay? This is the HTC Droid Ares, okay? Now, if you're not in the United States, the original version of this was actually the HTC Hero. That actually came out in Europe first. And so what they did was they rebranded this and made it the Droid Ares. Hey, Gaza, good morning. Good to see you. And so this is the very first Android phone that I had, and this is also one of the first Android phones as well, because before this one they had the T-Mobile G1, and in Europe it was called the HTC Dream. And then I think this was the second phone. It's called the HTC HTC Hero in Europe, but in the United States it's called the Ares, the Droid Ares. You know, so if you remember when Android first came out, there was a big push by Verizon for the Motorola Droid. And so the Motorola Droid was the flagship Android phone, and this one was the secondary Android phone, which is the HTC Droid Ares. And so HTC has had a very, very long history with Android. And you know, and if you see here, that's my HTC M1, and you've probably seen this phone so many times. I love this phone, okay? And I'm going to be talking about it more, but I also have the Motorola G1, one of the first generation. Awesome phone, awesome phone. But let's go back to what I was actually talking about. I was talking about the Google phone, okay? How whenever Google released Android, okay, a lot of people were thinking that it's going to be called the Google phone because it's going to be distributed software-wise with Android by Google, okay? And at the time, people were thinking Android and was going to be similar to Apple. Okay, Google was going to get into the phone business. And so everybody kind of speculated that's why they were releasing Android, okay? Because if you remember, at the time that Android came out, Apple's iPhone was released as well before that, and it was a huge hit. And so all of these companies wanted to get into this, okay? Now, if you did... Oh, Gaza, so Gaza's just quickly asking, wow, is that a Bollywood film in the background? Yes. This is actually, just look forward to my channel later. I will be doing a review on Dangal. Awesome, awesome movie. But sorry, to get back into the Android news. Yeah, thanks for asking, Gaza. But, you know, whenever Android was released, everybody really thought that Google was going to get into the phone business, okay? And the companies knew that, okay? And so because of that, Google was like, no, 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 we're not going to get into the phone business. Okay, we are providing Android for all of our partners, HTC included, Samsung, and the many, many hundreds of manufacturers out there who were making phones, tablets. They just wanted to get Android out there on as many devices as possible. But as everybody knows, that was like a way. I think if you're in the geek community, you know that Google was very smart about it. So they were putting Android on all these devices. We're going to be partners with you. And the big companies, they're not stupid. They knew what Google was doing. And so the whole point of, Google saying we're not going to be producing our own phone is because they wanted to get Android out on as many devices as possible. And, if you're a geek, you know that the history of Google, of Microsoft, of Apple, the whole point of all of these companies, Facebook, everybody, they want you to use as many of their products and services as possible. Okay? And so, hey Lance, good morning. Thanks for joining. And in this case, if Google could get Android on as many devices as possible and then have partners to work with them to have it on as many devices as possible, guess what? Now, the Android, it's not really about Android. It's about getting people into Google's ecosystem. That's the whole point of it. And so now, fast forward to 2017, and you see now where Google and with Android is at, and now you see that the Google phone, what everybody thought in the geek world was going to happen, it's finally happening. So it started off with like, hey, we want everybody to use Android. It's open source. We want to be partners with you. Boom. Android's on pretty much over 2 billion devices now, at least registered devices. But eventually, Google started showing signs that they were going to now not become a partner with these companies, but become their competitor. And like I said, companies like Samsung, like HTC, LG, all these companies knew that this was where Google was heading. And so then when Google first released their Nexus phone, you remember the very first Nexus phones, they were actually produced by HTC as well. Okay, and then later on that evolved into the Pixel phone. And now Google, having bought HTC for $1.1 billion, specifically their mobile phone division, and also they getting their virtual reality division as well, now they're going to really say, okay, we are going to be a hardware manufacturer now. Now we're going to purchase HTC to do the hardware end. And now they're going to be truly, truly a competitor against even the people who use Android. But the thing is, Google was smart about it. Since there's so many devices using Androids, there's so many companies that depend on the Google Android ecosystem, you're not going to be able to compete against that, because anybody knows that in the mobile space, there's really only two companies. There's Apple's iOS and Android. That's it. And Android, by far, has the largest amount of users. It has the largest penetration worldwide, not only in first world countries, but also second and third world countries everywhere. If you think about India, if you think about China, those two populations are the largest in the world. Just think about it population-wise. The population in the United States is about 300 million. The population of China and India together, that's probably going to be like 3 billion people, and the whole world population is about 7 billion. So even there, they have a lot. But if you go to Europe, South America, and Africa, they're growing extremely quickly when it comes to businesses and infrastructure. And Android is there, okay? And so Android, with Google really controlling it, even though it is open source, now that they purchased HTC, now they can have what Apple has, okay? They were always heading in this direction, okay? They want a Google phone. Okay, they want something where it's completely vertical, and that's one of the main reasons why Apple is so successful with their business model. I will always say that Apple is the #1 marketing company in the world. But if you think of the way that they set up their company, there's a reason why they do it vertically. There's a reason why they have so much control. Okay, when you have that much control, you could control a lot more variables. Okay, they could keep competitors out. If you want to make accessories or anything that works with their Apple devices, guess what? You have to go through Apple. And so there's more money involved there as well. There's licensing fees. So anybody who has an Apple device, you understand this. Even if you're buying accessories and stuff, of course you could get ones that are no name. But for a lot of things, you have to get licenses from Apple in order to play in their vertical ecosystem, okay? Whereas Android, it's a lot more wide and open. But by Google doing this, and I'm going to call it the Google phone from now on, by Google doing this, they're going to be able to control and also basically take out competitors that were their actual partners before. And so Gaz is saying Samsung may be able to destabilize the market share with Tizen, slim chance. Yes, and Gaz, I'm glad you brought out that point, because as I mentioned earlier, when Android was first released, these companies like Samsung, they were not stupid. They knew what Google was doing. They knew that they wanted to get their software, their ecosystem out of as many devices as possible, and eventually they would have to control and become a competitor. But at the time, companies like Samsung had developed their own operating system, like Tizen, okay? But it wasn't just Samsung, okay? Even like there was WebOS. If you remember WebOS from the Palm Pre, I think WebOS is awesome, okay? And then there was also Sailfish OS made by ex-Nokia employees. That's also an offshoot of Android. And I can't remember the other versions, but the biggest one out of all the possible competing ones was Tizen by Samsung. But that really didn't work out of the South Korean market. And so now, you know, we're in a case that there's really only two mobile operating systems in play. Okay, now obviously we think about the Ubuntu phone as well. You know, their Linux was trying to get into that space, and they're still trying. There's still developers who are developing mobile-centric, operating systems that are Linux-based. Those are still in development, but you know, really, there's really only two. And so now we're at a point where, with Google not having officially purchased HTC, what are they going to be able to do, and how is this different from, you know, I have a picture of the Moto G, which is this one. How is this different from what actually Google did with Motorola? Okay, so if you didn't know, and I did talk about this in the video that I did earlier in the week, but I'm going to go more in depth here. If you didn't know, Motorola is basically the inventor of the cell phones. Okay, Motorola, I used to work for Motorola, and Motorola actually created like a walkie-talkie cellular. They were basically pre-cell phones for the military and stuff. And Motorola produces a lot of communication devices. They've been around, I would say, over 50 years. So the Motorola has a lot of patents. Okay, a lot of patents related to cellular technologies. So that is the main reason why Google bought them. If you remember, Google and was going through a patent wars, you know, with Oracle for Java, but also, you know, with Apple, Samsung, all of them. I mean, all of these were related to patents, you know, and really they were related to control of this business sector, because, you know, if you know, Microsoft charges some Android manufacturers for patents. You know, they make a lot of money off the royalties there. And so when you have rights to these patents, legally, then you could actually charge other manufacturers to use these technologies, even if they're not directly related to it. And so when they bought Motorola, that's why they bought them. They bought them for the patents, you know, and everything that comes along with that. Good morning, Rose. Thanks for joining. And the difference here with the purchase of HTC versus Motorola, Motorola was primarily for the patents. And as you know, Motorola was then sold to Lenovo. But for HTC, it's purely to produce phones for Google. Okay, that's the main reason initially. But there's going to be another element to it as well. So let me see real quick. Lance says, Samsung has its own app store, at least on my Galaxy S7, but you're still using Google service for everything else. Yes, Lance. And like I said, these companies, they really knew that this was going to happen. And so they tried to produce their own operating system, produce their own ecosystem. But at this point, there's just too many Android devices. Okay, it's going to be very hard for anybody to compete unless you're Apple. Okay, Samsung, they have the size, they have the scalability to try and compete, but you know, once you have that ecosystem on so many places, it's very, very difficult. Now, technically, as you know, as a geek, it's not difficult. I just put on the distro on my computer, or I'll put a distro somehow on my mobile devices. You could get versions that work on mobile. Cool, I can use it. But really, on a larger scale, that's not going to work. You know, that's not going to work for the majority of people, like 99%, because you need an ecosystem around it. And Android and Apple's iOS, they are those ecosystems. So for anyone coming in, and you know, Windows has been in the mobile space way longer than either companies, with Windows CE, you know, the compact edition. But ever since then, ever since Apple's iOS came out, Android, they completely demolished Windows. Okay, so Windows, as I mentioned in other videos, they're taking a different strategy. You know, instead of trying to produce their own operating system, they go ahead and put their services on these phones. And so if Microsoft can't even get into the whole mobile space with Android and iOS, then the chances of anybody else coming in, even with all the money that they have, it's going to be pretty tough. You know, I mean, I would say at this point, it's impossible at this point. Maybe later on, but not right now. You know, so let me see what else. Rose to say, I contribute to Pure OS Linux Phone Libra. Thanks, Rose. Yeah, there's, you know, maybe I'll do some more research on another episode and just see what's available out there. And maybe maybe I might just like try to put a Linux distro, a mobile distro. I might do it on my HTC One. I don't know, but maybe that one, or maybe just my Moto G, you know, just to try it out to see if it works, okay? And so, yeah, so with Google doing this, okay, like I said, now that they have purchased HTC, they're going to get about 2,000 engineers from their mobile space. Hey, good morning, Nikki. How's it going? Yeah. Actually, I'm in the U.S. Yeah, it's actually yeah, Nikki, it's, you know, I'm like, it's like 9 a.m. over here, okay, and so I'm in Central Time. Yeah, Lance, I would totally use a phone that ran a Linux OS. I would too, Lance, and but the thing is, like I said earlier, if I'm gonna put an OS on my phone, you know, you want to be sure that it works, obviously, and that it has an entire ecosystem around it. Of course, you could put a Linux version on your phone, and maybe you could just use the web and everything else, but you won't get everything else that comes with it. And at the same time, and you know this being a Linux user, you put a distro on your machine and it might break, you know, if it's not something that's stable and that's well supported. Okay, the big thing is well supported. You need a community behind it. And with Android, you know, it's Android or Apple. I'm sorry, you need one of those. But if you're going to be experimenting and stuff, then cool, you know. I mean, I'm going to try that on mine. But in terms of an everyday use, I want the entire ecosystem around it. I want the support behind it, the security features, you know, everything else that these ecosystems and the community and money provide. Then right now, it's, like I said, it's either going to be Android or Apple, okay? Now, besides phones, okay, so now Google is heading towards the vertical portion of it. And you know, with the Pixel phones, the Nexus phone, HTC has done phones before. And so what I expect is next year, whenever HTC produces their next phone, even beyond the Pixel 2, it's going to be different, okay? And hopefully it'll be for the better, but at the same time, we're going to lose some things. You know, if you notice with the Nexus phone and the Pixel phones, they don't have things like a micro SD card. And you know how big I am on having micro SD card expansion. And more than likely, they're not going to have a headphone jack. You know, that's going to suck. But at the same time, I'm kind of interested to see with the money, of course, that Google has, with the resources, what can they produce out of this? Are they going to be producing something that is absolutely amazing? Or is it going to be something that's very similar to what we have now, but just slightly better? Okay, I'm not sure. Okay, and so for the phone part, awesome. We will have a Google phone. And who knows? Google might change it to Google phone. I think that'd be a cool name. I mean, that's what everybody thought the original Android phones were going to be as well. And so this makes sense. But really, another thing that actually Google gets with the purchase of HTC is their virtual reality division, which HTC Vive. You know, I think a lot of people who have actually tried the HTC Vive, it gives an amazing experience, you know, against such things such as the Oculus on the high end, right? But the problem is, because it's HTC, they didn't have the financial backing to compete, okay? Because even Samsung's in the VR space as well. But now with Google having this, they're going to be able to expand their division, okay? If you notice, Google's been doing a real big push into AR, augmented reality, and virtual reality. And so now with the purchase of HTC Vive, they have another asset. So here, Google is effectively, now they have their own phone division now, purely phone, but they also have a virtual reality division, okay? Now, Google could easily create all of these things themselves, right? But by purchasing this, they already have the infrastructure and they have the brand, and they're going to be able to move a lot quicker. And so I really feel that this is going to be, in my opinion, it'll be great for HTC because they've been losing a lot of money. Even the founder of HTC, Sher Wang, she came back a few years ago, but that didn't turn things around. And who knows, HTC as a company might not exist in the future. Okay, they might not, just be realistic. But it being part of Google, I think we will get better phones out of the whole Pixel line. That's my guess. If HTC can still keep a lot of its DNA, you know, with the amazing designs, I want boom speakers to come back, then awesome. It'll just make the latest Pixel phones or hopefully Google phones much better than they are now. And at the same time, because they are vertical, they'll be able to compete directly with companies like Apple a lot better than they currently are. You know, they have a lot bigger brand, okay? Whereas before with the Google Nexus and even the Pixel phones, it's more like a testing ground, okay? But the bad thing is, here's the bad thing out of it. Because Google is now officially getting into the phone space, they will be competing against the people that use Android, their partners, okay? They'll be competing against the Samsung, the LGs, the Huawei's, the Xiaomi's, all these other companies, Apple. They're going to be competing against them as well. So I'm not sure if that's going to hinder innovation in the smartphone world. It could, because, you know, with all the resources that Google and Apple has, and they own both ecosystems, it's going to be hard for you to innovate, in my opinion, if they are primarily the companies that control the ecosystems. Okay, so that's my fear with the Google phone. But overall, as I stated in the video that I did earlier this week, I think that HTC being purchased by Google is a good thing in the long run, more positive than negative, because with HTC, their history they have, with the background, and then Google becoming more of a vertical company, I think it's going to bring more competition, but at the same time probably improve the quality of what Android has. Hopefully, that's my hope, okay? And then the companies that are already in the space, it's going to make them step up their game as well. You know, just with recent things like the LG V30, which I'm pretty sure I'm going to get now. That's really what I want in Android. And so if Google is going to produce the highest quality Google phone they can produce, and then to differentiate themselves, LG, Samsung, all these other companies are producing the highest quality Android phones along with features that the Google phones don't offer, then awesome. I'm all for it. And so I think in the end, it is good news, okay? So, speaking of Apple's iOS 11 has actually been released in terms of you can actually go download it, okay? And so with iOS 11, you know, you can actually download it. Very similar to many other versions of iOS, it's not really about making huge differences, adding a lot of features, you know? And, you know, we talked about this heavily, but if you're the type of person, if you are a Linux user, basically, then more than likely, if you're a Linux user, more than likely, not always, more than likely, you're not going to be primarily an Apple user, okay? You might have an Apple device, okay, or you might have an Apple Mac, but in terms of your primary operating system, you're probably going to use something like Linux for your desktop, laptops, and you're probably going to use Android for your mobile devices. The reason being is people who use Linux are people who are also want more freedom, okay? And so normally they're going to choose Android because it does offer you more features, okay? And so with iOS, it's never ever been about adding a lot of features, okay? And Apple, they have the money, they have the resource, they have the development team. If Apple wanted, they can produce the most fully featured operating system out there if they wanted. But that's not where they're going, okay? And so with this one, it's more about adding additional features. And so with iOS 11, from what I could see, the improvements are really not for the mobile phones. The improvements are really for the iPads, okay? So it's things such as like better multitasking, drag and touch, more features for the Apple Pencil if you have, you know, the Apple Pencil available. And so note taking, okay, so more things for the iPad. Now for the actual mobile device, it seems like it has stuff that is under the hood, like emojis and stuff, better support for emojis. Let me see what else I have. It's my computer's internet's not that great today. Quick type for the iPad, augmented reality. All of this looks like it's really for the iPad. Let me see. Okay, all right, so better stuff with messaging, live photos. Okay, so from what I could see here, there's not that many improvements on the mobile side. App Store, better photo features, yeah, and some improvements to Siri. So with iOS 11, you know, this is something that, this is kind of different with what Apple's doing versus Android, because Apple still makes money from their iPads, you know, and if you look at the tablet space, it's been going down year over year in terms of sales, even with Apple's iPad. But now Apple sees an opportunity and they're making a big push towards using the iPad, because in my opinion, the biggest competitor to the Apple iPad is not the Android tablets, in my opinion. I think the biggest competitor to the Apple iPads are actually the Windows Surface devices. You know, my brother has the Windows Surface devices, and I'm using it, and the Surface is awesome. I mean, I'm not a big fan, as you know. I mean, Windows, I'm not going to use that. But in terms of the way that Microsoft did it, okay, the way they implement it on a tablet, it's awesome. You know, I think that's the way it should be if you're going to be doing that on a tablet. And if you notice, all these features that Apple is continually adding to their tablet, it's really meant to compete against the Surface. That's my opinion. Okay, they really want people who use the iPads for it to be their main computing device when it comes to larger screens. Okay, they don't want people to use their laptops unless it's an Apple Mac laptop. If it's going to be a touch type tablet, they don't want people to use the Microsoft service. They don't even, in my opinion, I don't even think Apple sees Android tablets as competition anymore. They're just not, even with Samsung. You know, because honestly, the development of features and stuff for Android in terms of a tablet form, it pretty much stopped to me. You know, there's nothing really exciting on there. You know, most of their time is being spent on the mobile devices, whereas Apple is doing the opposite. They're focusing more of their time improving iOS to work on tablets. So that's pretty smart. So let's see what we were saying here. So Rose is saying, I prefer a Linux phone, forget about Google and Apple. Yeah. Me too. I mean, like I said, maybe I'm going to test some. If I can find one that works well and that's stable and that has some support, cool. You know, I might just have one of my phones as mainly my main driver to see how it works. Let me see. Agreed. Rose Lance is saying, I think a lot of folks in our community, Linux lovers, would use a Linux phones. Absolutely. Gaza's Imp is saying that's a very true statement. Rose say, cough, Windows Uggs, you should help convert your family to Linux. Well, actually, most of my family does use Linux. Okay, my brothers use Linux, and so does my sister. But it's not their main operating system. They use Linux. They use Windows, and they use Mac. I myself, you know, I have Linux, but I also have Windows in a virtual machine, and I use Mac as well. And so I use all three. But for me, my primary is Linux. It'll always be Linux. Okay, and so no arguments there. It's always going to be Linux. And so with iOS 11, you know, it's more of iterative things. And if you notice, even with Android, for a while now, Android's been more iterative. You know, just like making small improvements. A lot of the improvements are underneath. And so I think, I mean, being a geek, I want as many features as possible, you know, but that doesn't always work well if you think about catering to the majority of people. You can't constantly have new features, at least on the surface, because that confuses people. And at the same time, you want to keep things consistent so that if somebody's new to your platform, it's easy for them to use. If you're constantly making changes, okay, this is from the software development world, okay? If you're constantly changing things on the surface, you could always make changes underneath, okay? But if you're constantly changing the way your operating system looks, the way it operates, the way it works, it's going to cause problems, okay? That's why people like Apple, you know, companies like Apple, that's why they keep it consistent, and that's why they don't make many changes. And if you notice with Android, that has been the state of things right now as well. So if one person uses an Android device, they could go to any other Android devices, and for like 90%, they're going to be able to use it, okay? Whereas when the Apple world, since they control things so much, 99%, you're going to be able to use any Apple device that's a phone or a tablet, you know, okay? So that's kind of where Google is wanting to go with Android, and that makes sense. If you're in a software development or UI design, you would agree with that, okay? And so a lot of the features are very iterative, and so I don't see anything here for iOS 11 to me that makes me say, wow, that's amazing, because let's be real, a lot of these features that Apple introduces in iOS, it's already been on Android. You know, multitasking, do not disturb, emoji stuff, you know, all of this stuff has been on Android for a while. It's just the way that Apple does it, it's a little different, okay? And a lot of times, I think with Apple, when they release features, they usually refine it more, okay? That's just my opinion, okay? So, the last bit of news, this is pretty much mostly software, even though the Google phone, yeah, it's physical, but it's also software. The last bit of news is Linux Mint 18.3. And so there have been some recent announcement for Linux Mint 18.3, and the code name is Linux Mint Sylvia. Okay, and so if you go to Linux Mint site on their blog, I think in September, they listed some things on the newest version of Linux Mint that's going to be released. And a lot of the features here, they are under the hood improvements. Okay, and so one of the biggest thing that they tout for this new version is it's going to have support for high DPI. So high DPI stands for high dots per inch. And so with high DPI, you're able to offer better resolutions for smaller screen sizes. Okay, so for like your smartphones or your laptops. Okay, so that's what high DPI will allow you to do. Okay, and so that's one of the main things. Now, other things, and I'm going to go into this a little bit further, but other things they're going to do is offer you better backup solutions, okay, and also better reporting, okay. Now, before I get into the details, let's see what other people are saying here. So Gaza is saying the Surface isn't really a pedigree tablet like the iPad. You know what, Gaza, I would agree with you in a sense that if you're just thinking purely for tablets, okay, I still think the iPads for a tablet, they're still going to offer you the best user experience, okay? But when you combine a tablet in a way that's actually usable, like productivity, okay, I still think the Surface wins because it is a full operating system, and then when you dock it or something, you know, it can be a laptop replacement, okay? And I can't, in my opinion, I cannot say that with the Apple iPads, even though Apple has really been marketing the iPads as your replacement for your laptops or even your computers, your desktops. To me, I don't see that. Now, if you are a person who is more of a general user, okay, just consuming like information, videos, music, and so forth, I think the iPads are excellent for that. They're the best in that, you know. And some would argue that no, I can do everything on my iPad, but no, I mean, unless you really don't use your computer that much, okay? I'm not going to be going to my iPads if I want to, you know, be editing videos. That's not where I'm going to be doing, you know. I'm not going to be going to my iPad if I want to play games, you know. I'm not going to be going to that, you know. But with the Surface, you're able to have a full operating system. So you can use it as a tablet, you know. As a tablet, I would definitely say Apple iPad's still on top, okay? But when it comes to a tablet, hybrid, and full productivity, because you do get a full version of Windows, right now, Apple and Android, they don't have anything that competes with that, okay? So that's my opinion, okay? So what else are you saying here? Okay, Gaza, you're also saying incremental changes stifle innovation. It's a safe bet, but it can be Apple's undoing. Well, I think, Gaza, as I mentioned a little bit earlier, there's a reason why incremental changes are done. You know, like I've been in the development world. You know, I was in the technology industry for a while. I thought the same thing. Like, why don't they just push out the newest releases, or why don't they update their version of Windows or whatever? Why don't they give us the newest versions? I understand now why. Okay, so I mean, me myself, I want as many features as possible. You know, I want to see big changes. Okay, but unfortunately, that doesn't work out well. You know, especially if you think about, once again, how it affects the majority of people. You know, if you're releasing software and it's constantly changing, like I said earlier, it's going to really affect a lot of people. And at the same time, if you make a lot of major changes, there's more chances that you could break something. Okay, and that's something that you don't want. You know, you don't want to update on your phone and now you can't use your phone and it's bricked because they're testing so many new features. Okay, so that's really the reason why. Okay, in my opinion, from a technical point of view, that's why they don't give out so many features, even though they could do it. Okay, and so Gaza said, on the whole, the specifications for Apple products tend to be several generations behind whatever is currently on the market. That's true, Gaza, but you know, I've mentioned this so many times on all of my episodes, is that Apple, they are the #1 marketing company in the world. They have the most powerful brand. Okay, and I've talked about this before. You could have the best product in the world, you could have the best technology in the world, but if you don't have the brand and marketing, nobody's going to care. Okay, people don't buy things because it has the best specs or it's the highest quality product. They buy things because of the brand recognition. I mean, a perfect example is Coca-Cola and Pepsi. Okay, a long time ago in the 80s, they had a Pepsi challenge where they would, like, and if you're old enough, you remember in the 80s. And so they did a challenge where they had two different soft drinks, right? But you didn't know what the brand was. And guess which one people chose as the better tasting, better quality tasting drink? They chose Pepsi, okay? But then they did another test where you could clearly see the manufacturer, the company brand, Coca-Cola and Pepsi. They did they did a test, one where you didn't know and one where you did know, and guess which one people chose when they knew. Even though Pepsi tasted better, they chose Coke. And so that is something that I push really heavily. I am in the marketing space, and just think about you yourself, what you purchase. Do you purchase because of the quality or specifications, or do you really purchase because of the brand? That's why if you go to the stores, anything, they're always going to have the top tier brands on top. You know, and when you think of a brand, there's many things that you associate with it. Okay, so it's no mistake that people, when you hear the word Apple or they see the symbol Apple, they don't think about the technical specs. They think about how it makes them feel, because if you're buying, if you do marketing, marketing is about psychology. Okay, and so when people think about your brand, like if you think about Linux, you're thinking about certain things that go with Linux. Same thing with Android, same thing with Apple. That's a brand, okay, even if people might not see it that way. So just think about it that way. That's why no matter what Apple does, they're going to outsell you. I mean, 99% of the time, because they have the more powerful brand. They have the better marketing, okay? And so, Samuel S., in my opinion, Samsung tabs are never a competitor to iPad because Galaxy tabs are just bigger size, Galaxy no phones. Yeah, and that, you know, Sam, it just goes back to what I just said earlier. It's not about that, it's about the brand and marketing. You know, they just simply beat them, okay? And same thing with Samsung. They have a very powerful brand. If somebody says Samsung, you're automatically going to think, oh, best Android devices or high quality Android devices, or you're going to be thinking about Samsung Galaxy Note, Samsung Galaxy. You know, that's not, once again, that's not my mistake. They spend billions of dollars in marketing. So then you see their commercials, you see their branding, you see that people using their devices. You know, there's hundreds of Android manufacturers out there, okay? Thousands if you add them all up. And so, once again, it's the brand and marketing. So, yeah, so if you're ever looking at anything that you're buying on your everyday, the clothes that you wear, the products that you buy, what you think about it, trust me, it's because of brand, it's because of marketing. Marketing is why you buy things, you know, not because of the quality or the product specifications, because there's many other things that I feel that are better quality or better products, but people aren't going to buy them because nobody knows about them, okay? And so Rose says, agree, Gaza, Apple is behind in specs. Gaza Imp is saying Linux Mint HDPI, is that for Cinnamon only, or the DE's getting the same treatment? As far as I know right now, it's going back to it, it's really for Cinnamon as far as I know. But who knows, it might go into other versions, because I know with each one of these distros you can enable DPI, you know, but this will be built in right away. And so let me finish the comments really quick, and so then I could go deep into this. So Rose said, when will Ubuntu release the future LTS long-term support? Will it affect other distros like Mate, Linux Mint, Peppermint? Is it next year? I'm not sure about that, Rose, because as you know, Linux Mint and most distros are actually based upon Ubuntu and Ubuntu Debian, but really Ubuntu. And so it really depends on what's coming downstream from Ubuntu. And as far as I know, Ubuntu 17.10, which would be the newest version of Ubuntu, it will not have the Unity desktop anymore, the desktop environment, DE. It will be using GNOME once again. Okay, so that'll be interesting. And then eventually that will downstream to all the other distros that are based upon Ubuntu, i.e. Linux Mint. Okay, and so we'll see. Samuel says, I think Ubuntu 18 will be the next LTS next year, maybe. Yeah, released. Yeah, and you know, for people who are brand new to Linux, you know, probably some of the things that they are talking about, it's probably doesn't make sense to you. So when they say DE, they're referring to desktop environments. Okay, so basically the look of your desktop, you know, how it looks. Okay, so in Linux you could have many different desktop environments. You know, you could have GNOME, you could have KDE, you could have XFCE, you could have Mate, you know, and in this case you have Cinnamon, which is basically a modified version of GNOME. Okay, so that's Linux's own interpretation or own version of the Linux desktop environment. And when people are talking about LTS, what they mean is long-term support. Okay, just because Linux is free, it doesn't mean that there's not support in a community behind it. So long-term support normally means that you're going to have support for many, many years after this version's release. If you look at your Windows Microsoft operating system, it has long-term support, and Apple's macOS, it has long-term support too. But it's only for a limited amount of time, just like Linux. So okay, so that's what that means. And so Rose to say, a purchase based on many factors, quality, specs, and price. I would no doubt buy a Linux phone, or perhaps making my own Linux phone if there was Linux OS for my phone to replace the Android OS. Yeah, you know, Rose, I think geeks, for the most part, we do look at those things first, okay, in my opinion, okay? Like I myself, I don't feel like I buy things based upon the brand first, okay? That's why I have all these different brands, okay? I buy whatever works best for me. But at the same time, if you think about these brands, you know, there's usually things associated with it. You know, like for example, if I'm buying a you know, an LG phone or an LG device or a Samsung device, I pretty much know that there's certain things that are better whenever I buy this brand. I know the quality, usually it's going to be better, the support's going to be better, and they're financially backed. You know, so I'm not going to be buying from a manufacturer that maybe they have a better built phone, but they might go out of business next year and I have no support. You know, so, you know, I get what you're saying. For geeks, we do look at those other things first besides the brand. But at the same time, I think a lot of geeks do their own research. And so I will also look at the brand itself. You know, I will also look at the history of the company if I'm not familiar with it, okay? Because I do want my devices or my services, whatever I buy, I do want support in the future. And if, for example, if something breaks or something, I want to be able to get a warranty or something, all right? Or if my phone gets hacked, you know, or something like that, you know, are they going to offer me services to take care of any damages that come from that? You know, things like that, okay? So, yeah, I agree with you. I mean, for most geeks, we look at not the brand first. We look at the brand normally second or third. We normally look at the quality. We look at what it offers to us first. Okay, I would agree with you there. So Lance is saying, I love Mint 18.2. The only problem I've had is that when using a second monitor, I get flickering on the monitor, mostly when watching YouTube, probably on an NVIDIA issue. Yeah, probably Lance, because I'm running Linux Mint 18.2 and I've ran it on multiple monitors. I'm going to get a new monitor, so I haven't had those similar issues. And so I'm going to get a second monitor, so then I can actually have a second window, so you know, when I do video editing and stuff, I can still use my computer, okay, on a bigger monitor, on a second monitor, okay? And so what are the other features that Linux Mint 18.3 will provide? So besides the high DPI, it's also going to have, as I mentioned earlier, better backup solutions, because you know, whenever you're using Linux Mint, there are already built-in backup solutions. You know, this has been there for a long time now. But Linux Mint, and I've said this many times before, and you've seen my videos, Linux Mint is my favorite distro, okay? For the main reason is that, number one, it just works, okay? I've used that Apple tag so many times because it truly does. When you install Linux Mint, unless you're a type of person who really wants a lot of technical things, you know, right a bit, it will pretty much serve 95% of the computing world. Linux Mint would do it. You install it, it's got all your browsers, your office applications, a lot of accessories and software, and I have many videos on that I've done before, and it works. You don't really need to do much else, okay? And so Linux Mint, they have been constantly improving the usability of Linux. And I say with more so than Ubuntu, okay? And so that is one thing that is very powerful, because if you are using Windows, especially if you're using Mac, a lot of people are, number one, familiar with it. But then again, usability. If you use an Apple Mac and you've never used Linux, right? And you use an Apple Mac or Windows, I think a lot of people, myself included, Apple Mac, it's way easier to use, in my opinion. It's a lot cleaner usability-wise. And it reminds me so much of Linux. Okay, so if somebody, in my opinion, if they used a Mac and then they moved over to Linux, something like Linux Mint, it's very similar. Okay, I mean, the usability is there. Okay, and so that's why I think Linux Mint, they're really constantly making improvements that will actually help the usability for the user. And that's great. You know, you don't have to spend a lot of time troubleshooting things, right? I mean, of course, there are issues sometimes with video cards, or maybe your network's not working, but for the majority of people, I've had Linux on so many devices, Linux Mint specifically, and the number of problems I had is so small. Most of the times it just works. I don't have to do anything else. Okay, so with that trend, Linux Mint is also including something called time shift. Okay, so with time shift, what it's basically doing is updating the Linux Mint backup solution that's there. So this one's more for backing up and restoring a lot of your private data. Okay, so that's really, really important. And since they are integrating this into the existing backup solution, they make it really easy. Okay, so that's another thing with Linux Mint. Whenever they make these improvements, it's there to make things easier, hence usability for the user. Okay, so with Linux Mint, you don't have to be a super nerd or super geek. And I have mentioned this in other videos. Linux is easier to use than Windows. There's a lot less things that you have to think about, specifically when there's a distro like Linux Mint. Okay, so with this improvement, it's going to be easier for people to back up things that are important to them. Okay, you know, ease of use goes a very, very long way. And then the final thing I think that they're also going to be offering with the Linux Mint 18.3, once again, usability, is a better reporting. Okay, I think there's going to be a thing called Mint Report. Yeah, Mint Report. So basically, what this allows it to do is offer better reporting whenever things go wrong on your computer. Okay, you've probably seen this on Apple, Mac, and also Windows. When you have a problem, you can actually report that. But here, you can also see what the problem is, because a lot of this is just really code or commands or, you know, messages that most people don't understand. I mean, even us being Linux users, you're not going to know every single type of error message. Okay, and so normally, if you've used Linux, if you have a problem, okay, and you want to get help from the Linux community, a lot of times, if it's something they can't answer, they're going to ask for your log files, right? You know, because Linux produces a log error file, so you're going to have to find that and then send it to the Linux community. Then people could help you, you know. But here in this case, they make it easier, you know. So you could just use this Mint report. And once again, just like the whole time shift feature, I know this will help the usability and make it easier for people to actually use Linux. Okay, and there is one more feature. Is XReader. And so XReader, if I remember correctly, I don't use XReader, but it's the PDF viewer, if I'm not mistaken. And so this will improve readability on it. And the reason why all of these things, high DPI, XReader, the reason why those are important is, and you know this because you use your mobile devices, more and more people are using their mobile devices as their main computing device. So a lot more people read on their devices now, and so when you have things such as high DPI, your resolution is going to be better. When you have things such as improved XReader, so if you're reading on your device, it makes it easier. See how the whole theme is? Make things easier for people who are using your operating system on your devices. Okay, so all of these things are meant to do that. And so although from what I can see here, there's not a lot of huge improvements to 18.3 because it is a point release. I think the changes that they're making, you know, very iterative, very small changes, they are important. You know, they just make the whole user experience better. Okay, so let's see what else is being said. So let me see. Okay, so that's Samuel is saying, if some Linux distro developer like Ubuntu, Linux Mint provides stable and robust mobile OS for current Android running hardware, I think I will erase Android and load Linux OS. Yeah, Sam, I mean, that's my hope as well. You know, but unfortunately, a lot of these projects, they need money, you know, because, you know, people in the Linux community, they do this for free. And I've said this many times before. If there is a project that you really enjoy, you get value out of, and whether it's Linux or whatever other people you want to support them, you know, donate money, you know, but the reality is they need much more money than that. Okay, and so you know, if you don't have like big backers like Google, Oracle, Microsoft, Apple, Facebook, you know, because all of these companies do contribute to the open source community, okay, but they have different reasons for doing it. But if Linux as a whole had more funding, I'm pretty sure we would have a purely Linux-based operating systems for our phones right now. So I think eventually we will have that because that's where everything's heading. And so all these people who are developing these distros, they're going to be heading towards that way anyway. So, but, you know, if we can support our communities, our developers, the people helping other people in the Linux community, that's awesome. So I highly recommend that if you can support, please support them. And so, yeah, Lance is saying Mint is one of the projects that donate to LibreOffice as well. Yeah, Lance, thank you. Thank you. I myself as well. Yes, I definitely donate to mostly Linux men. Do donate to LibreOffice. I've donated to OpenShot, VLC, just whatever that has given me a lot of value that I enjoy using. I would definitely donate, because I've said this before and I'll say it again. The best way to support a community is to give them money if you can. Okay, if you can't, give them support through the technology, basically the skills that you have. I want to say that. Or basically, if you want to help the community, you could get on the forums and stuff to help people. So there's many ways you could help, but I always say, if you can, the best way to support a community is through money, because when you give them money, they can actually use it for things that help keep their businesses and their communities going. Okay, so if at all possible, support your Linux community, or any other community that has really given you value. Okay, and so guys are saying, is it possible not to upgrade on the fly with Linux Mint, or do you still have to nuke and pay to the new version? Oh, Gaza, I'm not sure, because I just now read this news, so I don't think it's available for you to upgrade yet. Okay, I think these are just announcement of features that are coming out, official announcements. Okay, upgrade to distro 18.1 to 8.2, 8.3 was on the fly upgrade. Lance says, I think that. Yeah, you know, and here's another cool thing. Okay, these are for all the people who've never used Linux before, and I have had videos on this. Linux Mint has gotten so much better, and many other distros as well. Before, if you have to upgrade your distro, it was a pain. And I'm glad that they mentioned that, because a lot of times back then, you might have to nuke, like wipe out your whole operating system to get a new version. Okay, because I've used Linux since 2000, and then I didn't really use heavily Linux until like 2005. Okay, so we started with Ubuntu, of course. And so at that time, it wasn't always as easy to upgrade. You know, a lot of times, even if it was like, here's a button to upgrade, it would break something. Okay, and so that's why I always recommend that you back everything up before you update. And most of the times, I would have to wipe out my whole operating system, nuke it, and then put a new version. But it hasn't been like that, at least on Linux Mint, for years. Linux Mint, you see new version, you go to your software update manager, see new release, update, make sure everything's backed up. Your computer reboots, bam, you have a new version. So it's way easier now than it used to be. Okay, and I think anybody who's used Linux for a long time can agree with that. Okay, Rose, I'm running Linux Mint 17.3 my Lenovo. Yeah, I still have I did have 17.3 on this laptop, Rose, but I haven't. I've upgraded to 18.1 or 18 on this one, and then I have some other older bunch who have older laptops that has older versions of Linux. Okay, let me see. Gaza Imp is saying, that's actually, I'm glad that they were able to resolve the issue. Great. I totally agree with donation to the Mint, Lance. Yes. Samuel, great, Lance. Keep doing it. It's only we should back them up. Yes. Yes. So, yeah. So, Linux Mint 18.3 Sylvia, not a lot of new features, but I think, once again, the features that they do add, the iterative features, will actually benefit users in the end. And I'm really interested to see what will happen with Ubuntu, with their latest release, where they're going back to GNOME, because, you know, GNOME, to me, I don't really enjoy using GNOME purely the version that you see, the base version of GNOME. I don't like that as much, and so I'm interested to see what the GNOME team is able to produce, and I'm really interested to see how you know, Ubuntu integrates GNOME in their latest release. You know, the first time that it's not using Unity for a long time now, so 17.10. And then, as you know, if you use Linux Mint usually doesn't use the latest version of Ubuntu, and for good reason. Okay, Linux Mint is all about stability. They really highly praise stability, and so although Linux Mint, in my opinion, is the most stable version of Linux, in my opinion, and the easiest version to use, it's not always the latest and greatest. Okay, it doesn't always have the most recent version of Ubuntu. It doesn't always have the most recent version of the kernel. But if you look in your software manager, you could actually upgrade the versions of your kernel, you know, manually, which is pretty cool. And so that's it for the announcements of Linux Mint 18.3 Sylvia. Very similar to all the other news that I just talked about. It's mainly about software. Okay, the Google phone was about, you know, Android or Google buying HTC primarily to have a vertical structure, but it's also really about Android. Then iOS 11 is purely about software, the newest version of the operating system for the mobile devices, tablets. And then Linux Mint 18.3, once again, it is about the operating system, but primarily focused on the desktop. And so let's see if there's anything else on here. Gaza saying, I'm not used Linux Mint for years, still nostalgic, and it was one of my first distros. Yes, Gaza, I want to talk about that real quick. And so Rose says, I guess I'm kind of distro hopper, but my main distro is MX16. But I have tried Solus, Ubuntu, Mate, and I still want to try Linux Like 3.6 and Peppermint 8. Yes, and so I want to talk about that briefly, and I know we have talked about this before, but Gaza talks about being nostalgic, right? And that's the funny thing. If you use Linux regularly for a long amount of time, eventually what will happen is you'll remember that version of Linux that you really got excited, that really got you into Linux. Okay, very similar to if you were a Windows user or a Mac user. Like if you've used Windows for a long time, you could remember Windows when it was DOS, purely just DOS. All command line, and then when you upgraded to Windows 95 and how amazing that was, with the GUI interface, really, truly going all GUI, and that was awesome, okay? And similarly with the Mac, if you use the Apple Macintoshes when they were first released, like the Apple IIe back in the early 80s, that was your first experience with Apple. That was amazing, their GUI interface, then seeing the transition to now. Now, within the whole Linux world, since there are so many distros, so many versions of Linux, you could get nostalgia from so many places. You might have start off with Ubuntu, like myself. You might have started off with Linux Mint. You might have started off with Red Hat or Fedora or what's the other one? I can't remember. Anyway, you could have started off with any of those. You were hardcore and started off with Arch right away, or you could start off with Puppy Linux if you wanted something really simple and light. So there's so many places that you could actually start having nostalgia with Linux. Oh yeah, I remember now. OpenSUSE. Yeah, so OpenSUSE, Fedora, those were also one of the first distros that I used. So that's awesome. That's a feeling of nostalgia that I really can't say it's the same. It's similar. It's similar to Windows and Mac. But since you have so many different versions, there's so many places that you could come in. And then nowadays, if you are brand new to Linux, you're younger, wow, I mean, you could come in from so many places. You could have come in from Antergos, okay? You could have came in from Peppermint OS. There's so many places that you could come in nowadays. Whereas back then, I say that back then, but Linux has been around. And so back then, normally most people would have came in either through Ubuntu, I think with the most people, and then later on with Linux Mint, and then some people with Arch. I think those are the three main that most people would have came in back then, okay? And, okay, so let me see. Rose says, I guess I'm kind of distro hopper, but yeah, I just said that. Yes, I think a lot of people use Linux. They do try out different versions. And for people who've never used Linux, that's called distro hopping. And I think everybody does that. You kind of have to. If you're going to be a Linux user, normally you're going to try out different versions of Linux. And the reason is, in my opinion, because if you've only used Windows or you've only used Mac, and then you come into the Linux world, you're like, wow, I could install this and I don't have to pay for it. That's the first thing. But then after that, you realize, wow, there's like hundreds of different versions of Linux that I could try. And then you start downloading those. And then after a while, you're like, well, I could do different experimentations, right? I could change the look. I could add different functionality. I could use this for a server. You could go crazy in that. And so I think everybody who is a Linux user goes through that. And it's awesome. Okay. A guy said, I love to be a rock hopper, but I'm stuck on Arch. That's not a bad thing to get stuck on. Rose is saying, Gaza, which Arch do you use? OS Revenge, Manjaro, Antergos, or perhaps Arch Labs? Yes. And for people who don't use Linux, a lot of these different versions of Linux, they're actually based upon other versions. Okay, so a good point is like Manjaro. Manjaro is actually based upon Arch Linux. Okay, and Arch Linux, I definitely do not think it's for brand new users. But Manjaro is a version that a lot of brand new users can use while still getting all the benefits of Arch. Okay, and there's also other versions that I didn't mention, like Kali Linux. I might want to try that later on. That's for penetration testing and security. So Lance said, I tried PC Linux OS way back. It was fun, but not easy to use back then. Yes. Samuel says, Manjaro is okay with me, Rose. And Gaza M said, I use pure Arch. I built it myself. Yeah, Gaza, that's that's why I love all this stuff, because depending on the type of personality that you have, depending on the type of time that you want to spend learning, you could learn a lot. Just that's why I love using Linux. That's another reason. I keep saying this in every video, but whenever you get into the Linux world, you learn a lot. You just don't learn how to use one version of it, okay? Because like I said, you're going to be that type of person who starts trying out a lot of different things. And so whenever you're trying out things, and this is true for anything, you're going to run into problems. That's for sure, okay? But the difference is when people are using Linux, you become better at solving problems. Why? Because you have to face more problems, okay? Whereas if you just use Windows or Mac, you only know how to solve one type of problem. Thanks, Lance. Thanks for joining. You only know how to solve one type of problem in the Windows world or Mac world. So if you have a problem with Windows and you use Windows for a while, you'll be able to take care of that. But then you move over to Mac, you have a different set of problems. But with Linux, since there's so many different versions, and more than likely you're going to try a lot of different versions, your problem solving skills get better. And so now if I have a problem with any operating system, I'm a lot better equipped mentally to go handle that, because I have faced so many problems trying out different versions of Linux and experimenting. Okay, so it's been an hour, and so yeah, we're going to go ahead and close this off. So Rose said, oh, well, Gaza, there's too many complicated. Maybe I would use Hannah Montana. I'm probably thinking that's a different version of Linux. And so I just want to say thank you once again for everybody who's joining. Of course, always Gaza, Lance, Rose, Sam. Yeah, thanks for joining as always. I really appreciate all of you joining. And next week, hopefully we're going to have more cool geeky news. And I don't think there's been a week that there hasn't been cool news in the geek hemisphere. And who knows, maybe I will try to find a version of Linux that I can put on my phone. Maybe not next week, but maybe I will try to get one on this phone. If I could get one that's working, then I'll try it. And then I will do an episode on it, because I think that's really cool. And so if there isn't anything else, God says bye, everyone. Be great, okay? Have all a good week. You too. Thank you, everyone. And if you did enjoy these videos, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. And if you did want to support my channel further, you could do that at patreon.com/geekoutdoors. Thanks for joining this live episode. We'll see you on the next one.